Namaste to all of you. A very warm welcome to this evening's Zoom call. Um, as always, we have a special guest today, Sandeep Balakrishna ji, and you all know the protocol, so I don't have to repeat them. We will hear Sandeep ji, and after his initial talk is over, then we'll open up for Q&A. Friends, the whole, I and Sandeep ji, we had a lot of discussion. In fact, let me just, I'm sure I've shared what Sandeep ji is all about, but then briefly, he is a writer, author, and, socio-political cultural analyst. You see, socio-political and cultural analyst. So that is a very deadly combination. So he's done some phenomenal work, and I'm sure some of you would have seen his videos on YouTube. We have all watched his videos, and we are, great admirers of Sandeep ji. It is an honor to have him here. His book, Tipu Sultan, the Tyrant of Mysore, is a must read for everybody. It's a fantastic book which actually exposes the whole cabal of trying to portray Tipu as some kind of a, freedom fighter or some anti-British, some kind of a thing. And then Madurai Sultanate. Madurai Sultanate is something which none of us though being in South India, we hardly know about it. But then Madurai Sultanate had its own history that has to be understood. Because deep south, we thought we were always secure. But then the Sultanates here, the Islamic rule in south also created havoc, not just the Mughals and others. So these are the works that Sandeep ji has been doing. Some fantastic, phenomenal work. In fact, his Twitter handle is Dharma Dispatch, right? So the very term denotes that he is focused on Dharma. And so it's a pleasure to invite him. And the topic we chose is need for Hindu minds to change from defeatist victimhood to confident dharmic kshatriya. I think both of us had discussed this topic, 3-4 versions of this, and finally we agreed on this. As you all are aware, we have been victims of invasions for centuries, and that victimhood is somehow seeped into us, and we have become apologists. Though we are not the criminals, we are not the culprits, but we tend to imagine that we are victims and we are culprits. So this kind of a defeatist mentality is something which we need to unshackle. We need to really focus on what is our glory, try and regain our past glory, but in a dharmic way and in a kshatriya. Kshatriya is not going killing somebody, but it's about being very assertive about our own roots and our own philosophies. So this is what we have agreed upon. And so I would leave the floor to Sandeep ji. So what I would request is, during this time, we will switch off the chat. So there will not be any cross discussions and no messages will be allowed so that people will not get disturbed with the chat going around. So Dheeraj, you can please block the chat. And then, after Sandeep ji is finished it, when Q&A starts, then we'll, unlock the chat. Sandeep ji, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Namaste and warm good evening to everybody. Giridhar ji has set the context quite beautifully, comprehensively, and I'm thankful to him personally and the entire team at Pragna Bharati for organizing this. Needless, it's a great honor, and he's been kind of very generous when he said that we've been back and forth discussing the topic, but I just zoomed in when he gave this topic and I said, this is going to be it. So it's a great topic. So please accept my heartfelt congratulations on that. Need for Hindu minds to change from a defeatist victimhood to confident dharmika kshatriya. That's a mouthful. So I've just made a few high-level points, and we'll see as how this topic unfolds itself as we go along. So we'll begin with this second shloka, very well-known shloka from the Bhagavad Gita in the Karma Yoga Adhyaya. Kutastva kashmalamidam vishame samupasthitam Anarya Jushta Masvargyam Akirtam, Anarya Jushta Masvargyam Akirtim Arjuna, Klaibyam Masmagamaf Partha, Naitattai Upapadyate, Kshudram Hridaya Daurbalyam, Tyaktotishta Parantapa. I don't think a greater opening for this or a more appropriate opening for this kind of a topic is needed. So I chose this shloka. And I'm sure all of you on this forum are aware of this shloka. Some of them might have even memorized it and chant it on a daily basis. And that said, this shloka does many things at the same time. And needless to say, it's a highly inspiring shloka from the Bhagavad Gita. And I don't think we need a better motivational work, a bigger guide for our entire life and the Bhagavad Gita, instead of reading all kinds of random self-help books, that teach you how to live. You have a treasure house right across the road, right in your backyard, so to say. So with that out of the way, there's a reason why I quoted this shloka, because the Hindu mindset today largely resembles that of Arjuna, to whom Krishna begins, Bhagavan Shri Krishna begins his reply with this shloka. Now let's just think about it. What do Hindus have today as a global community? We are the third largest religion, or dharma, if you don't want to use the word religion. We are the only religion that has, to which the word dharma can be most appropriately applied. So I said our mindset today resembles that of Arjuna. Now let's think about it for a bit. What do Hindus have today as a global community? We have everything, and everything at our own command. We have strength, both in numbers, in terms of resources. We have goodwill. We have a timeless philosophy that is unmatched and will be unmatchable. We have an extraordinary spiritual and worship heritage. We have a glorious, unbroken civilization which continues to survive today intact. It is the oldest civilization and culture in the world. We still have grand temples. We keep building a temple, a new temple every day. Somewhere in the world is being built. Just think about that. Then we have huge wealth spread across the world among the Hindu community. We have immense respect on the global stage. We have produced world-class scientists, artists, writers, actors, and we have the greatest culture in the world, the most sublime culture in the world, a living culture in the world. We have an extremely strong family system, which we do not see anywhere in the world. We have only the greatest gift, perhaps, that we have given to the world, that is Sanskrit. Right now, I have listed about 24 items, 24 strengths that Hindus have at their command, at their fingertips. And this list can only be multiplied infinitely. We have all of this, all these treasures, but we are still like Arjuna. Now, remember that Arjuna became faint-hearted after he had gone to Indraloka, to the heaven, to Svarga. Why did he go there? He didn't go there to have a party. He went there for military training, to obtain astras and shastras, to obtain weapons. And why did he go there to obtain weapons? Because he knew that someday, one day he had to fight the great Kurukshetra war. It was preordained. And yet what happened when the war actually came to him? What happened then? On the battlefield, he became dejected, not because he was scared of losing. He was the greatest warrior of his time. And he was not scared of losing or even dying. So it's like this, yeah, the closest analogy, everyday analogy I can give is this. It's like you've made all preparations to cook a grand feast, a delicious meal, a 10-course, 27-course meal. But you don't light the stove. This is what Hindus are faced with today. This is what was Arjuna's fate as well. You know how to cook. You are a master chef, to use a contemporary term, but somehow you're scared to light the fire, which actually is the first step for cooking. So this is the exact state, and this is what is one of the major significances of the topic that we have selected today. Now, the Dwapara Yuga still had some dharma left, and therefore Arjuna could get a great preceptor, a great master, an extraordinary guru like Bhagavan Shri Krishna. But today, in this Kali Yuga, Hindus have no choice but to become both Krishna and Arjuna. They have to play this double role. They have to constantly invoke Bhagavan Shri Krishna within themselves, and they have to put on the military uniform of Arjuna. Because the alternative is, what is alternative? There is no alternative. This is a battle we have on a daily basis. We are waging a battle, we are fighting a battle for mere survival. There is no alternative but to do this, but to play this double role of Krishna and Arjuna. Now, one of the commonly repeated quotes, and I'm sure all of you have heard this everywhere, is how even after nearly 1,000 years of repeated brutal barbaric Islamic invasions followed by nearly 200 years of British colonization and the ongoing Christian conversions of all sections of Hindus. Despite all these repeated attacks, India is still a Hindu majority country. This I'm sure all of you have heard. But what nobody asks, what nobody tells, is how exactly did this happen? How come even after more than a millennium, or at least nearly a millennium, how come India, or whatever remains of the original India, how come that part of the world's geography is still majority Hindu? How did we, retain that? Did someone do some kind of magic and said, okay, fine, whatever happened in the past happened, but you're still a majority? Did it happen by magic? You know the answer very well, as much as I do, that the answer is not magic. The answer is blood. Blood and valor. Valor, the nearest English equivalent, is what we all know as Kshatra, or the warrior spirit. Not just the fighting spirit, it is valor and it is a warrior spirit. Now, it is not even merely a spirit of a soldier who goes out in the battle and fights. It works at a very deep and fundamental level, as we shall see going forward. Now, it is this Kshatra that gave Hindus the innate self-confidence to fight so powerfully, fight so repeatedly, relentlessly. We must remember that throughout this millennium-long history, Hindus never gave up fighting. Even today, they haven't given up fighting. The proof is this call that we're having. They never put down their weapons. They might have had, they might have faced some kind of, dark times, but they never lost hope. And more importantly, they never gave up fighting. And even more importantly, the majority of Hindu sections, Hindu society, did not convert to alien faiths, like predatory faiths like Islam or Christianity, unless they were, a sword was put on their neck and said, you convert or we'll kill your wife or kill you or whatever it is. And even the number of people who converted at the point of sword is extremely minimal compared to the overall population of the Hindus in India from day one till today. And Kshatra doesn't mean simply getting military training or, fighting on the streets, although fighting on the streets is also needed today, going by what we are seeing. Kshatra is fundamentally a spirit. It is an all-encompassing spirit that also gives courage for an actual physical battle. Kshatra is needed to uphold dharma. So I think that kind of ties in beautifully with the word Giridharji has used in the topic, dharmika kshatriya. Because Kshatra is an indivisible part that only Kshatra can and will uphold dharma. And in turn, dharma guides Kshatra. So you see the inseparable relationship there, because without dharma, kshatriya becomes barbarism and savagery. Without dharma, kshatriya becomes mere barbarism and savagery, whose most visible manifestation is what we see every day on an ongoing basis. It has one word. It is called jihad. Jihad is not war. Jihad is a religious imperialism that stands on the footing that is based on one man's sayings, which were codified in a very crude way in one book, which is called Holy, which should give you roughly a rough idea about what holiness, how Islam defines holiness. There is no dharma there. There's just pure savagery. It is an all-out war with no scruples, no principles, no morals, except a crude and brutal capture of political power. So this is why this, it's kind of strong, but I hope, I had to say this in order to emphasize the full import and significance of the word kshatriya, both in theory and in practice. More so in practice, because we have a long history of the repeated victory of kshatriya. They are not Hindu resistance and fight back and reclamation. They were not mere military victories. They were reclamations. They were, you look at all the primary sources, either in Sanskrit, Kannada, Telugu, Marathi, whatever. Every single military victory is not characterized as merely a military victory. It is called dharma punasthapana, the re-establishment of our ancient dharma. So look at the differences as big as between the Zameen and Asman, sky and earth. So this is why, kshatriya is why only Bharatavarsha has the concept of something called a dharma yuddha. No other country has this notion of dharma yuddha. So, but unlike the past, we no longer have what is known as conventional physical warfare, like, going out on a battlefield and fighting. That concept is largely a thing of the past. But now instead of a conventional warfare, what Hindus are faced with, the real battles that Hindus are faced with, is that they have to fight on multiple levels, on multiple battlefields. It is a multi-pronged, all-round attack. We have been encircled. Think of, Hindus being in the center of Kurukshetra, surrounded and encircled by all their opponents who want nothing but their destruction or conversion. This is what we are faced with. And this has no geographies now. It is global. And some of these major battlefields are in the realm of ideas, narratives, culture, media, education, universities, all the way up to kindergarten schools. Education is a major battlefield that has been captured by our opponents. Even sports has not been spared. You look at what happened, when that lady, she bowed down to her tribal custom or tribal goddess. I forget her name. So immediately the media did not look at her as someone who had, attained a great height in sports. What they looked at is, that she was regressive because she practices what they call backward Hindutva practice, because she bowed down to a Hindu goddess, to a Shakti Devata. So these are some of the major battlefields. Nothing is spared. Nothing is spared from the invasion and takeover of our opponents. And it's spread across the globe, like I said. And to state the obvious, everybody has to please remember this fundamental point always in the time that we're living in today. Hindus have no friends anywhere in the world. I'll repeat that. Hindus have no friends anywhere in the world. And India as a democracy, as a sovereign republic, India might have some temporary friends at the diplomatic level, at the level of global trade and business and other nice things. But these are temporary friends and they are fair weather friends. But Hindus as a civilization have no friends. This is the main reason for the relentless, ruthless 24/7 attacks against Hindus. When our opponents look at Hindus, they do not look at whether this guy is a Dalit. On the ground, in the media, what do? They shed crocodile tears for Dalit rights and downtrodden and poor people. At the level of strategy, they look at them as Hindus who need to be converted. So this level of deception plays out at multiple levels. So, and the intent of all these attacks is the same. One thing what we need to remember is that our opponents cannot win in a fair fight. They cannot win in a direct battle where there are well-defined rules of engagement. There's simply no way they can win that kind of a confrontational one-on-one fight in the sense that we understand it. So the tactic is one of the tactics, and this is a major tactics, all of you are familiar with it, is to abuse, attack, assault so viciously, so continuously, so relentlessly, so ruthlessly that the Hindus become demoralized. They become ashamed of themselves. And as you're all familiar, this has a history of more than 150 years when the British found out that Hindus could not be broken culturally. So there was a way to break them culturally, which was when Macaulay introduced his infamous minute on education. So you divide the entire, what the British did, and this is a tangential point, one of the evil geniuses methods that British did to break Hindu society was, apart from introducing English education system, was to make a comprehensive study of the entire Hindu society as if, it was like a museum piece, like a laboratory experiment. So what they found was that you should all read this beautiful book called, not beautiful, but very informative book called The Hindu Martial Classes. It was written by a British general or lieutenant or one of those guys. What he did was that he broke down all what is known as a warrior classes, soldiers, the fighting forces. He broke it down to the last man. So when you look at the army composition, even today, Indian Army and whatever composition, the various regiments, what do you see? You see the Jat regiment, you see the Rajput rifles, you see the Assam rifles, Madras sappers, all these guys. Why are they named like that? It came from this book. These were known as the fighting or the Kshatriya classes. So how do you break them? You break them in various ways. By demonizing them as thugs. The word thug is now a pejorative word. It is seen as a term of abuse. But the thugs were one of the most, they offered some of the most fierce resistance to the British. So what is a way to break them? You brand them as criminals, as robbers, as bandits, make their life, isolate them basically, make their life so miserable, create public perception, a negative public perception against them. They were freedom fighters. And this example can be multiplied across different tribes. All of them were Hindu tribes. So systematically you isolate each component that of Hindu society that threatens you at multiple levels. So you demonize the Brahmins. Why? Because they were the custodians or they had knowledge about the spiritual and philosophical aspects that sustains Hindu culture. So you demonize them. Then you demonize the Kshatriyas and write obscene books that they were only debauchers and pleasure-loving people. They were not. Look at the history of our princely states. Now, when you look at all the princely 500 odd princely states that were eventually merged into the Indian Union, precisely Hinduism was precisely preserved, traditions were precisely preserved in all those Hindu states. Mysore. Why is Mysore Dasara still preserved intact? Because it is a continuation of the foundation that Maharshi Vidyaranya laid in the Vijayanagar Empire. In your own Andhra Pradesh, I think there's this famous kingdom of Bobili, one of the most Hinduized traditional kind of kingdoms. So you split the society at every which possible way, down to the last atom, and you get the mess that we are in now. So despite that, some amount of whatever Hindu traditions and native Sanatana flavor is left. And that's why I said that the forces that this British experiment unleashed on Hindu society have grown enormously thanks to the kind of prime minister we had, first prime minister, Mr. Nehru, and his great granddaughter-in-law, whatever she's done. So these, all of whatever we are facing now didn't happen by accident. So, yeah, so that brings me back to the same point which I had left. So the idea is to make you ashamed of yourself, to demoralize you at a deep level, at the level of your psyche and your mind. This is pretty much the summary of what is happening even as we speak now. And this is what demoralization, in other words, is what Giridharji called defeatist victimhood. So in the Bhagavad Gita shloka that I just quoted, Bhagavan Shri Krishna uses 4 important terms. Anarya. Arya means noble. Basically someone who is refined and cultured. Anarya is somebody who is uncultured, who lacks culture and is not civilized and refined. Second term, Akirti, meaning infamy, that which is not honorable, that which is not praiseworthy. 3, Klaibyam means faint-heartedness or cowardice. Klaibyam is cowardice. 4, Kshudram Hridaya Daurbalyam means despicable weakness of the heart. All these 4 terms precisely indicate what we today call victimhood. Because of an innate cowardice or weak-heartedness, we are unwilling to summon the courage inside us to fight, and we perpetually think of ourselves as victims. Because we don't fight, we lose culture. Culture cannot be preserved without fighting, and because we lose refinement and we become uncultured, we do not obtain kirti or merit or prestige or respect. So at a very fundamental level, victimhood is a state of mind. It is a state of our psyche. Believe me, the forces that operate on our psyche at that level, at that fundamental level, you cannot rationalize them. You can't even recognize them. When you look at all these, what we call Macaulay Putras and Lely, left liberal, all these guys, they are operating like robots because this kind of weak-heartedness, faint-heartedness is so ingrained in them that they fail to recognize that it even exists. This is at the root of why they abuse their own culture and their own motherland. They don't even use the word motherland. It is a term of shame for them to use motherland. At that level, they have been destroyed, and unfortunately, they were considered to be the elite public opinion makers and intellectual class and all those wonderful things. So victimhood should be separated from the word victim. Yes, Hindus were victims, they still are victims, and they continue to be victimized on a global scale like I just explained. But the distinction between victim and victimhood is very subtle. Victimhood means that a person has accepted defeat without fighting the war. I'll repeat that. Victimhood simply means that a person has accepted defeat without fighting a war, even though the weapons are all lying in front of him or her. So this brings me back to the first point I made of having such enormous strengths and resources and money power and even political power, if you will. In spite of having all this strength, we do not realize its full potential in practical life. It is one thing to have power. It's an entirely separate thing to know how to wield that power. This has been perhaps one of the greatest failures throughout Hindu history. We see only a few glorious instances of kings and emperors who not only had power, but knew exactly how to use it, how to wield it. So now take the example of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh itself. You will not find you will not find an organization like this anywhere in the world. The BBC, I think I still remember, more than 30 years back, they had done a cover story on what the RSS exactly is or stands for. There were some usual, secular kind of language in that, but overall, it was a product of many, many years of research had gone into that piece. And they were actually frightened that, this kind of an organization with such a strong backbone, what can it mean? So we'll put that in another language, in other terms, is that the RSS is an unparalleled, unique force. It is not just a social or cultural organization. It is a force, and it is a force for the better. So now look at the other side, just to kind of clarify this on a broader scale. Look at the other side. Now, in terms of sheer numbers, how many left liberals, total number of left liberals, secularists, whatever you want to call them, how many of these people, of this class of people, are there totally in India? Remember, we have a population of what, 132 crores. How many left liberals are there in this vast population? 1 lakh, 2 lakhs, 5 lakhs, 10 lakhs? That's not even 1%. So how many in this class step out of their luxury homes or whatever it is? How many of them step out and do any real service, do any kind of meaningful work? What kind of meaningful work have they done so far in their 70, 75 year long existence? On the contrary, every single thing that they have done has only weakened India, has only been to abuse Indian culture and Hindus and Hindu society and its traditions and festivals. But what they're really good at is two things. Number one, complete shamelessness, complete utter shamelessness and indecency in language and of late in dress, in manners, all round shamelessness. Number two, amplifying their voice and getting huge visibility. This is one thing that they have completely cracked on almost on a global scale. Now, what happens, and this is a very important point, because what this does is that again, it acts at the level of the psyche. When you see the same jokers everywhere, in papers, in TV, social media, internet, everywhere, when you see the same faces and the same jokers saying the same things repeatedly, again and again, and it's not even on a daily basis. Each person, peddles this nonsense multiple times a day. So that acts as a force multiplier, and therefore a kind of public perception is created that, they must, they're saying this, all of them are saying this, they must be really bright and learned and knowledgeable, intellectual, and scholarly, This kind of fake halo, a fake kind of light is created around them. And as a result, the ordinary persons, including Hindus, they begin to overestimate their real strength because of this kind of an atmosphere that they have created. So this is called setting the narrative. Basically, you use the same word and you copy paste it and change the language. What as a thought experiment, you can pull up any random newspaper, for example, Times of India. You begin reading their archives from around, say, roughly around 1986 till the Babri Masjid was demolished. So you pick up a copy of Times of India, of that time, the archives, then Hindustan Times, Illustrated Weekly of India, Hindu, Frontline, 4 or 5 papers, and compare the op-eds, columns, editorials, lead articles, expert columns. You compare them, it is a total cut and paste job. Complete cut and paste. You can just, only the faces and names are replaced. And the words, the language is replaced. That's all. And the length of the article is different. What they're essentially saying is the same thing. Nehru is our great father. Secularism is the only religion of India. Hindutva is a terrorist cult. RSS is a terrorist organization. And the fall of Babri Masjid was the destruction of India. Okay, I've given you 6 points. So they keep these 6 points in one page and then fill in the blanks. So Romila Thapar quotes Ram Guha. Ram Guha quotes Rajdeep Sardesai. Rajdeep Sardesai quotes his own wife. So this is what they did for more than 50, 55 years continuously. So obviously they get to set the narrative. And that has had a very negative impact, to put it mildly, as we've seen. And what that does on the psyche of the larger psyche of the people is that, like I said, the ordinary person really easily overestimates their real strength because of this, all this fake environment that has been created. And I'm going to tell you one thing, what has preserved us in spite of the relentless attacks. The sheer numbers of Hindus and their what is known as their illiteracy and backwardness. As long as there is that last dirty villager, what they call, as long as you have enough numbers of these last dirty villager who worship stones and sticks and trees and mountains, as long as this spirit is there, not in practice, as long as this spirit is there, no, this spirit is what enabled, what absorbed all these left liberal attacks for so many years. So anyway, so all this, to put it in summary, all these factors are some of the major reasons for what we call the defeatist victimhood mindset on the part of a lot of Hindus. But fundamentally, remember that for all their fake power, their fake narrative, their fake news, whatever their power of that narrative is, remember that they are just bullies. They are high school bullies who have good cars and great mansions. Basically that. They are just high school bullies. So I've kind of listed out some major steps or some main points to find a way out of this what is known as this defeatist victimhood mindset. The first is to always remember that the Sanatana civilization and culture, all our traditions, good and bad, whatever it is, that is different. All our traditions is the work of pure genius, and it is superior to anything that existed in the past and anything that exists now. Just remember this, that itself will instill extraordinary confidence in to overcome this defeatist or victimhood mentality. So if you're not convinced that Hindu culture, Sanatana civilization and culture, if you're not convinced that it is not the best or the superior culture and civilization, you must ask yourself just 2 questions. Question 1, would you like to be a Tablighi Jamaat guy? That is question 1. Question 2, would you like to be born in Pakistan or Saudi Arabia? Just these two questions will convince you that we have the best ever culture, the most superior culture and civilization, that spiritual genius, it's a work of spiritual genius. It cannot be conceived by ordinary humans. This is the best thing that we had and we continue to have, and it is our duty to protect it. And step number 2, as much as possible, we should all educate ourselves or get educated from books, movies, gurus, acharyas, about some of the core aspects of Hinduism and keep them in practice. You cannot learn Hinduism by reading books. You can keep chanting Bhagavad Gita for throughout your lives, but unless it is lived in daily practice and unless that practice is transmitted throughout our generations, it cannot survive. I mean, this is one of the major reasons that urban Hindus, especially English educated Hindus, cannot speak or defend cogently or even articulate their strengths of their own faith, because the element of practice has been lost. It's as simple as that. It has to be lived. It can't be learned, from books. So I recall a very beautiful incident that happened with a very senior Kannada literary figure, a great luminary. He's no more, and he died long back. So he was once asked that, about some of, so one of these secular guys said, you're so great. I really respect your work, and, I'm your big fan. You have such depth in your writing, in your novels and poetry, whatever. Why don't you come to this side? Why don't you use your rational thinking or whatever on those lines? So this man simply replied, look, I'm a very old-fashioned man. I like my stone gods and my unclean practices. They have served me well throughout my life. I'm now 65 or whatever, and I think I'll stick to it. So this conviction comes only from living that life, from practicing it. So then the third point is that I'm sure Sangh does this in a beautiful way, but just to give a different dimension to it, it'll go a long way if some local study groups, study circles, informal communities, satsangs, whatever are formed. And it can start with as simple as 3 or 4 families, your neighbors or whatever. But these groups, informal groups, should focus on civilization and cultural education. I mean, bhajans and Bhagavad Gita chanting have their own place, that everybody does. But what these things do is that it rebuilds communities. Because remember that Hinduism, the Hindu civilization, the bedrock, the backbone of Hindu civilization has always been community strength. This is the reason the British, and I bring this back, go back to the same point again. This is the reason the British introduced census. It was not a great, scientific experiment or something. They introduced census in order to break down the Hindu Samaj into its last atom and see how they could, isolate each community. And I think I've spoken about this. So we need to rebuild that. That is one of our core strengths. So step number 4 can be, So we must learn confidence comes from mocking and making fun of left liberals. Believe me, it's a great strength. We must mock them. We must leave no opportunity to mock left liberals and secularists. We must parody them, because nothing, disarms your opponent as effectively, nothing provokes him as effectively as mocking and poking fun. Just do it even when you don't have an opportunity. We see this happening in the online world in social media, but this has to be done on ground also. Even if there is no opportunity to mock these guys, you must create that opportunity and mock them. You must parody them. You must caricature them. but for heaven's sake, do not engage in any debate with them. It's another point that they don't, come and participate in a one-on-one logical debate. But even if they do, in the rare event that they do not engage in a debate with them and tell them to their face that they are an inferior species. Tell them that they are an inferior species, and or tell them that they need psychological therapy. So it really works. And last but not the least, stand up to their bullying courageously, bravely, by treating them with contempt. You should not say that, I also respect your viewpoint. No, you don't. Tell them you deserve contempt and this is my contempt. Believe me, it works. And I urge all of you sincerely to try it. It really works. At least it has worked for me so far in these 20 odd years. And I see no reason why it won't work for you. And I guess that's all I've had for now. And once again, I'd like to express my deep gratitude to Giridharji and the entire team of Prajna Bharati for putting this together, for inviting me to this event. And I'll be glad to take any questions from all of you.
Sandeep ji, thanks a lot for putting the context in place and suggesting a few remedial measures. I think so that people, digest it and will be able to hold on. Would you mind repeating your 4 steps, what you suggest? At least if you could just bullet points, you could list it out. I'm sure I would request all of you to probably ponder on these 4 points that he's suggesting. I'm sure when he's saying that you have to caricature them, he's not suggesting that you abuse them where you get caught under the law or whatever. But you do it in such a way that you do it with confidence and then you expose them, right? Sandeep ji, if you can repeat the point.
I mean, caricaturing and parodying doesn't mean you have to use obscene language, although maximum obscenity comes from their side.
True.
I'll give you a real life example for this. This happened way back in early or mid 1980s. That time, I think the communists were at an all-time high. So they had invited Arun Shourie to give a talk on the role of what? Okay, Arun Shourie had written a book called Hinduism, Causes and Consequences, in which he had made some rational criticism about Hinduism. The communists read this and they thought that, okay, this guy is on our side, so let's invite him for a lecture, let's give him a platform and make him tell that, talk about the great role of communists in the freedom struggle. So Arun Shourie, being Arun Shourie, made an exhaustive study of the role of communists in freedom struggle, came with one entire sack of books to the lecture podium, and he kept them all, piled them all, and a bunch of papers that, notes that he had made. And he started telling the truth of their freedom, of their role in the freedom struggle, which eventually turned out that they were directly responsible for the partition of India. So immediately they ganged up. It's not different from what is happening now. It's a technique that they've perfected from about for 100 years. I've done a podcast today on the history of communists. So what they did, the language that used is that they said, this guy, Mr. Arun Shourie, is like a girl whose virgin hymen has been ruptured more than for uncountable times. I'm paraphrasing this. This is a language they use. And even worse language today is used against the PM and RSS and other people. So, so when you say, you mock them or parody them, you don't have to get down to their language. Use obscene language, but do it in a way that damages them psychologically so that they don't have a comeback to it. Now, for example, you take Rajiv Sardesai and quote his example and, tell your friend or your child that, are you a human or are you Rajiv Sardesai? There's no obscenity in this. and it's parody. Okay, so I'll repeat these 4 or 5 steps.
Yeah.
So we must always remember that Sanatana civilization and culture is the work of pure genius that anybody, no human can conceive of. It's a work of pure spiritual genius, and it is superior to anything that existed before or that exists in the present. Step 2, as much as possible, educate yourself about the core aspects of Hinduism and always keep them in practice. So, when you start educating yourself, the subject starts revealing itself to you. I'm saying this from experience. Point number 3, form local study groups, informal local study groups like your extended family. Like it used to be a common practice, at least in my generation, that, you call your elderly lady in your neighborhood as chachi or mami or kaki or, whatever. This generic term auntie was absent in my growing up vocabulary. So this kind of informal community building, satsangs, whatever, really helps in the long term, and that should focus on civilization and cultural education more than just bhajans and kirtans. The important point is what I emphasize that on the word informal. So point number 4 is to mock, parody, and caricature the left liberals. I think we've seen this in detail. And last point is to stand up to their bullying by treating them with contempt. Do not engage them in any kind of a logical debate. They don't deserve it.
Okay, great. One thing is we are facing a lot of violent attacks on us, right? Be it what happened in Delhi or what happened to Palghar, or for that matter, in fact, a lot of things that are hidden in terms of this cow lynching is actually the people who are trying to protect the cows from the cow smugglers got killed.
Yeah,
but the narrative got completely hijacked by one version.
Yeah, it's called blaming the victim, basically.
Yeah. So, in the face of violence, right? What should a common Hindu do? What you find is the sense of negativity has seeped in so much. I wouldn't say negativity, or defeatism or whatever it is, frustration in some cases. It has gone so deep within them. We see so much of spleen being spilt on the WhatsApp groups and Twitter and whatnot. Probably they will never step out when the need arises. Actually, when you need to go stand up on the street, they may not do it.
Yeah.
But there is a frustration in them. One of the reasons why they feel uncomfortable going out is they feel that nobody is going to support them. So today I have one example where one of our karyakartas in Chittor wrote a Facebook post where he spoke about how the Christian church and the government, which is sympathetic to church, has abused his temple premises in Kanipakam. You know the Kanipakam, right? Kanipakam is near Tirupati. Yeah, so its chowltry and others were used for quarantine purposes. So that's a different debate, whether it should be used or not. Maybe all Hindu temples are opening up for the cause of protecting our people. That's a different debate altogether. This person had a view. He wrote saying that, my culture is getting attacked, tarnished. My temples are being desecrated. And this is being done by a Christian lobby supported with a Christian sympathetic government. Now he has been arrested for the past 1 week. 1 week he is unable to get bail, and he is he's been booked under seditious law. That it's a sedition. So ultimately, in the court of law, it might break down. It is not sedition; it's his view. When Naxal can say, I can bring something on a barrel, Tukde gang, they are also getting away. So probably he also needs to get away. But this 1 week, there's literally nobody to come and support to him.
Correct.
This is what every Hindu is facing on the streets. When they see violence, When they see violence can be in many forms, brutal forms, one or two get onto the media, but there are other forms of violence which are more subtle. So they're unable to respond to it. That frustration we see a hell a lot in media and social media, especially where they have a choice to vent for it.
Yeah.
How do you view this, and what is your suggestion in terms of how they should handle it?
Okay, you want a polite answer or a truthful answer?
Truthfully polite, whatever you want to call it.
Okay, so the point is that we have reached such a stage. Like I said, the backbone of Hindu society has been broken. We are not, it's like Hindus are fighting with each other. So you don't stand up for your fellow person because, you know, not realizing that what has happened to him or her can happen to me tomorrow. So basic stuff we learned in school, unity is strength. So that is lost. And we have reached, your Chief Minister Jagan is a dangerous guy, but the point is, this happened because Hindus allowed it to happen. All these Christian lobbies, pastors, all these jokers, evangelists who come on the ground, who are they? They are Hindus. They were Hindus. And they're converting brazenly only for money, especially in Andhra and some parts of Tamil Nadu, although that activity is kind of contained there. The point is, what both, by their very nature, both Islam and Christianity are predatory faiths. So to uphold and perpetuate a predatory faith requires brute force. And brute force will grow in strength when the state buckles to their violence. So ultimately it becomes a jungle Raj. So how do you deal with a jungle Raj? By yourself becoming a jungle Raj. This is the short-term solution. You preempt the violence and keep your flock together. As simple as that. Make it expensive. Organize, Hindus should organize themselves and make it expensive for them, not just them. Make it expensive for every political leader who supports such forces. As simple as that. Because one point of what is the meaning of an Islamic ghetto across the world? It simply means that these ghettos are land, they are conquered land. Those lands, those Muslim areas, whatever you call it, right? Enclaves, whatever. They are conquered lands. They've been conquered for Islam. Why did this happen? Because of vote bank. So unless you make it, and they have reached such a, staging street riots is like, putting that, all of us are familiar with the analogy of making a frog boil slowly, right? So, you gradually increase the temperature till the frog gets roasted or boiled to death. This is a long-term consequence. What we're seeing now, overpopulation, street riots against Hindu sympathetic government, which seemingly is not doing anything. Why didn't these riots happen when the Congress was in power? Simple reason, they were their own people. They were doling out land, money, mosques, churches everywhere. So there's no need to riot. So they're seeing this as this government and all Hindu organizations, activists, everybody, they're seeing them as opponents, enemies in a physical civilizational war. The only response is in kind. If the only way to make your government or anybody to understand this brute force, which Hindus do not do, every single riot from street riots, whatever, communal riots, from day one till today, has been invariably started by Muslims. That's a fact nobody sees. Every single riot. There's a wonderful book called Riots and Wrongs by a former intelligence officer. I highly recommend all of you to read it. Every single riot is started. So what is the response? The response is in kind. So when I have nothing but the immense respect and regard for organizations like Bajrang Dal. You're not living in a time of luxury of writing poetry or whatever. You're fighting a daily battle for survival or conversion. The choice is left to us.
Yeah, I think you rightly said. What happens is all these, let's call them WhatsApp jockeys. The moment Palghar happened, you see WhatsApp being flooded with. I know, as usual, VHP and Bajrang Dal are going to keep quiet. They're not going to do anything. No outrage. Nothing. Blah blah blah. It's like everybody wants VHP and Bajrang Dal to do something,
but they won't do anything.
They won't do anything, and they won't go and support them.
Yeah.
If one of their family members is part of that, they don't like it. They want the goody cushy life, but then they don't want to muddy their hands. What you rightly said is that I think somewhere we lost that connect to the society, and we have become islands within ourselves.
The pushback and the fight back has to happen at all levels, intellectual, because there's no area of a society and a civilization is an organic whole. So nothing is immune. You can't say I'm only going to do intellectual work, or I'm only going to become a minister or some Hindu activist. No, it doesn't work like that. Yeah. It has to occur at all levels, and it has to occur simultaneously.
Great. Now let's open it up for questions. Krishnan ji, please go ahead, sir.
Namaste, Sandeep ji. I'm a big fan. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, I have a few questions and one or two observations. One is you're very right. We are in the throes of a very defeatist situation, and which does not augur well for us and especially the younger generation. They have absolutely very little connect. Your idea about that community thing, while being pretty good, but I think it has to start from family.
It has to.
From individual family. And the other thing that I want to mention is we all, our thinkers and the so-called pundits, they all say Hinduism is knowledge based and blah blah. But to wrestle a pig, we have to get into the swamp. And so if there is violence, we have to respond with absolute shock and awe. So my question is, why can't Hindus come together and do the Hinduized version of Shaheen Bagh? Then we'll see.
I really have no answer to this question, because I think what has happened largely is that the biggest grand reawakening of the entire Hindu community as one unit, cutting across anything, was during the Ram Janmabhoomi movement. After that, for various reasons, all of us know that Kshatra, actually, that movement was what I truly call a completely casteless movement. Why did it happen? Because it tapped into something so fundamental that it became inevitable for Hindus to organize on that scale. So, and then the other biggest reason for this cultural weakening also has to do a lot with globalization. Whatever its economic benefits, which should be welcome, is that it eroded that fighting spirit. Is that the urban Hindus, what is now the aspiration of even a rural guy with a mobile on his hand? What are the images that he or she sees every day? Urbanization is the aspiration. So when he or she leaves that thing or becomes urbanized in the mind, the rootedness at the level of the village, which is where it is preserved still, that rootedness will slowly erode.
Fine. So friends,
this calls for a massive reawakening and rethinking at many levels. Because, like I said, no, we've been encircled. A circle is round, right, from all directions. So, yeah, these are just some piecemeal kind of solutions that we can talk and outrage and feel good about ourselves. But it is not a substitute for action.
Great. I think, friends, I request you to be very brief because you all heard Sandeep ji that he needs to go a little early. So I request you to just ask a question and then leave it. We know the context, so kindly don't get into the contextual explanation. Just ask the question and leave it. Next is Chandan ji, Chandan Lohia ji. Please go ahead, sir.
Sirji, namaskar.
Yes,
I'll
sir.
just start my video also so that you can see me. Namaskar, sir. Thank you for the good talk. Very motivating. How do we counter Section 259A? For example, in Thane recently, a Hindu family had refused to take delivery by a Muslim boy, and they've been arrested under Section 259A, which is hurting willfully another person's religion. Even on social media, even on every aspect, that is the first article which they use against us Hindus. How do you advise we counter that?
Okay, so the point is, what you're saying, sir, is you're looking at the outcome and the manifestation of a deeper problem. Why wasn't, this kind of Section 259A or whatever? I'm unfamiliar with these laws, but law is being used as a weapon. Indian laws are being used as a weapon to hurt specific Indians for a specific reason. And this is happening at the hands, the state is doing this. This kind of a thing was unheard of even 20 years back. Right? So, this is bigotry having state power. This is jihad having state power, nothing else. So, any solution that I can give you, what is a guarantee that they will not use some other section, and then all Hindus will say, okay, how do we prevent the misuse of this section? Where will this end? Like I said, a strong physical and cultural deterrent has to be there. For example, one model is Israel.
Mm-hmm.
In Israel, it is a crime punishable by law to speak anything negative about the religion of the Jews. The constitution disallows it. And a Muslim cannot contest elections there. This is how the tiny state surrounded by so many hostile enemies perpetually waging war. I think we Hindus collectively as a civilization have not yet reached that state where you have to be in a constant state of preparedness for war. I think we surely can do better than that.
Hmm.
So if this is the meaning of Hindu Rashtra, so be it. Make it a crime to speak negatively against any aspect of Hindu culture and religion. As simple as that.
Right.
Even without Hindus doing that, you get this new thing called Section 253, which I never heard of before.
259A.
Yeah,
It is,
whatever.
you cannot willfully hurt any or offend anyone on basis of their religion.
Whatever it is. I mean, the Indian law is a maze, so you can pull out any section, give it any interpretation. So,
Well, I think basically our Indian constitution is a carbon copy of Irish, British, American, and French laws. There is one singular aspect that is missing in Indian constitution is dharma. As long as you don't have dharma, it will keep on churning one section after another, which they can abuse it. I think like what you said, we have to fight the battle on all fronts. Yeah. Next is DKG. Please go ahead, sir.
Hello. Yeah, namaskar.
no,
Yeah, my name is Dipankar Sandeep ji. I'm a huge fan of yours,
Thank you.
and I go on regularly to Dharma Dispatch. And my small question is that can the Shastra Dharma be revived through current Gurukulams that are there and are being set up right now, which are coming up?
Well, can it be revived? Okay. this can be answered at multiple levels. Like I said in my remarks that Kshatra is not something that you see physically. It's not a physical manifestation, although it is that. It is a spirit which basically makes you stand up for and fight for and die if necessary to preserve your dharma. So it is already there. What is missing is that physical and lived link that associates it with dharma, which instills the, which basically reawakens the spirit of Kshatra inside us. Like when, you know, Modi ji or some such powerful orators and leaders, all he has to do is just ask a question and the crowd will say yes. The crowd will answer him. That is called invoking that Kshatra spirit inside you. Right, so that has to happen first at the level of the family. Hindu parents have become sissies. I'm sorry to use this word, but they have become sissies, especially the fathers. They're not making heroes. They're not creating heroes out of the children. So this aspect has to be instilled inside from childhood, basically. So I don't know if that answers your question, but you know, you can have a Gurukul. I mean, if you're thinking of having some kind of armed private forces that will stand up for dharma, it might happen. It might
that
not
will
happen,
be immediately banned for whatever.
No, it could be banned. It could be allowed to function. But these are, and I'm not, you know, kind of dismissing it as a solution.
Yeah.
The point is, it will have limited impact. The real change has to happen elsewhere for it to be more sustained.
True. Next is Dinesh ji. Dinesh ji, please go ahead.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Namaste, Sandhi ji and Dheeraj ji. Namaste. I'm Himanshu's friend. I live in Australia actually, and I follow a lot what Himanshu and other team does. Basically, I have one small question to ask, and apart from that, I just want to give a brief explanation about what I do. Basically,
no, but we do kindly. You know, he's running out of time. If I would request you to just answer questions.
I'll be very short. Now, as you know, that we have the opponents, like Muslims are the main opponents for Hindus, and their population now from 30%. I mean, 30 crores. That might go up to 50 crores anytime. You know, within the next few decades. How we can fight this population control, even if there is a control. But once they go above 30 crores, 40 crores, 50 crores, Hindus might be in trouble. So what is the government thinking anything, or what we can do? Like, you know, what I do is basically I've learned Quran. In last 6 months, I've been participating. Christian Friends is a YouTube channel where I learned Quran, and I made a note of 50, you know, some, blunders in Quran. And that's how I'm making them feel that they are not in the right situation, like right culture or a right religion. So I'm just trying to shame them, basically. And I've also sent you a link which gives brief explanation about Hinduism, about Sanatan Dharma. So how can we control that population? And how can we convert Garvapsi? Is there any possibilities? That is what I want to know.
The bus for doing Garvapsi was missed long back. You know, the biggest culprit who fought against Garvapsi was Gandhi. So we missed that bus, and now I think that is largely futile because Garvapsi has to be a community event. Where are the Hindu communities who think as Hindus as a unit? Apart from, you know, a scattered few people, genuine people who really work. That bus we missed. And as far as, you know, whatever controlling this Muslim population, all it needs is, like I said, on the ground, a strong deterrent, which speaks to them in the only language they understand, and a strong political will, which shows them their true place. Because it is a problem which will never go away. Europe is gone. Islam didn't even have to fire a bullet or stage any kind of riots that was staged in India. the West has to learn from India. We've been living with this menace for nearly 1,000 years. And we have lessons to teach on how we have contained them in the past. So it requires a strong cultural reawakening and an extremely strong political will, which has a constitutional sanction. There's no other way. The other way is, all of you know.
Yeah.
Look, very simple. Yeah? This guy, what happens when Islam acquires even an iota of political power can be seen in what is happening in London under Sadiq Khan. Within 6 years, he has completely changed the face of London. It's a different matter that it was UK is gone long back. Within 6 years, he has changed it. Why? Because he first thinks himself of as a warrior of Islam. His public face and his mayoral duties are different. But this is what has been ingrained in him. Show me one Hindu leader or any leader with a Hindu name who thinks like this first. The reawakening has to happen at this level.
Yeah, then it's start off with saying Sarva Dharma Samabhava and whatnot.
That's over.
Yeah. Sorry. I think we need to move on. Sai Bhargav, please go ahead.
Hello, Namaste, sir. I want to ask you about these honor killings. Mostly, we are divided like castes, different castes. No one identify himself as Hindu. They identify themselves with their caste. So, how to overcome this problem? How to unite all the people irrespective of their caste?
That is an uphill task. Yeah, I mean, look, it is very easy to break down a beautiful structure, but it's hard. You can't rebuild the structure with the same bricks, right?
Yeah.
There's really no short-term or magic solution to this, except that, like I said, it comes back to the same thing of reorganizing and reawakening communities. There's no other solution to this.
Actually, R. Vaidyanathan had written a book, how caste is a very powerful, caste is a Western term, a jati for us. But then he brought out, he's written a latest book where he says, this is actually a very positive force for us in economic terms. Economic terms.
Caste
only, only in politics that is being used for vote bank creations. I think our electoral system has to change where there are no losers. Once we do that, I think this entire thing will go. That's my view. I don't know whether you share it or not, Sandeepji. I feel that, first of all, a retro system, the British system has to be removed. This binary of one winner versus all other losers, that should go. Anyway, next is Shailaja ji. Please go ahead. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm audible. Thank you.
You need to come a little closer.
Okay. Namaste, Sandeep ji.
Namaste.
I just have a small question. You are talking about Hindus organizing themselves, and this is almost impossible because it is actually say governments which are paying the pastors and organizing the church. So in contrast, how do Hindus organize themselves as an institution?
Okay, so
I don't know if
I think I'd written a piece on this more than a year back, even before your Jagan came to power, that every Hindu village should have something called a no-go zone for missionaries. Like I said, make it expensive for these guys on the ground. If a pastor or these jokers come, with their evangelical Jesus thing, make it expensive for them, lock them up or do whatever it is to instill fear in them, real fear, so that nobody else tries this again. The only other solution is that there should be a, massive, look, if you organize yourself as a community, and if no land should be given in any village or town to build a church. But unfortunately, you have a chief minister who actively encourages this. So essentially you're waging, you have to wage war against the state. So choose wisely in elections or whatever it is. So
last election was
yeah,
vote
devil
against Chandrababu Naidu, not necessarily a
not
vote for
for
Jagan.
yeah. So because it ruined it on such a spectacular scale.
Yeah, but then now they have 5 years to keep weeping about it.
Major damage.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Next is Rajendran ji. Go ahead, sir.
Namaste ji.
Yes, sir.
Ji, you pointed out that there are several things that we have to do at this point in time simultaneously. I hear this as essentially a multi-dimensional thinking. Now, even in a single dimension, you can see even within our group, we'll have so many different ideas. Now, how do you think we can achieve this multi-dimensional perspective to finding the right place for the Hindu spirit?
I'm not sure I understood your question.
You said there are so many ways we'll have to fight to find a place for the Hindus in the society now, in the world society, right? Now, this requires a multidimensional thinking, which means this strategy must become acceptable to all of us, right? That we are fighting in so many different ways. Right?
Okay, so this one strategy becoming acceptable to all will never work. What can work is so small and incremental, but a change that will have a long-term sweeping impact. You cannot, put 500 people together in a room and force them to accept your idea, ask them to share their ideas and force them to accept yours. That's the reason I advocated point number 3, to form informal groups to keep the flock together. And for heaven's sake, please don't send your children to schools. At least till the current education system is reformed. That is where the poison is, seeded.
Yeah, sure.
They'll grow up and become your own enemies. Yeah, the son will become the enemy of the father.
Yeah, true. In fact, what Rajendran ji has asked for is what RSS is doing. It has work in all spheres of life, from labor unions to students to Bajrang Dal to intellectuals like Prajnawal. They're working on all fields. All we need to do is stand up and support and be part of one of that organizations, right? Thank you. Appaji, please go ahead, sir.
Sir, shall I have to unmute it?
No, don't touch anything, just talk.
Great. Namaste, Sanjeev ji.
Namaste.
You were saying that we have missed the bus of Garvapasi. What do you mean by that? And would you please elaborate a bit on that?
No, well, there was the Shuddhi movement initiated by Arya Samaj to reconvert Muslims back to Hinduism. So, after the death of Swami Shraddhananda, Gandhi essentially killed the Shuddhi movement by saying that, that fellow Abdul Rashid, he was a murderer of Swamiji. And he said, he is my brother and therefore he's not guilty. And people are, though people who are guilty are those who are spreading communal hatred in the society and whatever.
No. Should it not be a continuous effort on our side to bring back our brother?
100%, it should be. I am one of the strongest advocates for Garvapsi, but in the present times, you cannot attempt Garvapsi without serious damage to your physical, without serious damage to your own life. It has to happen. It needs to have an extremely strong organizational backing, which is ready for a physical fight.
See,
if you have organizations like that, then I'll be the happiest person to support it.
Other day, I have seen a post in one of the Facebook media that keeping the cross in Hindu temples also, allowing it to be a part of Hindu, what do you call that? The part of Hindu temples is a solution for bringing them back into this thing. Will it be of any use?
look, it's like this. Yeah, I mean, I think I tweeted this. Uh, you cannot apply the strategy of a wolf to a cow and pretend that the cow is a wolf. You simply can't do it.
Yeah. Thank you.
These are essentially predatory religions. There is only one way. They cannot come back.
Okay. Sir, Sandeep ji, there is a question asked by V.V. Lakshminarayana ji. V.V. Lakshminarayana ji is, now that we have spoken about Jagan, he is the one who prosecuted Jagan in the, you know that, right? He's J.D. Lakshminarayana.
Oh, okay.
Famous for that. Yeah.
Yeah,
He's on the call. He's here with us, but he's got an audio problem. He's requested me to ask his question. I'll just read it out.
Yeah.
How the caste reservations are affecting the Hindu unity. When the constitution and the laws are as per secular principles, then taking up issues on communal aspects is bound to end up in criminal cases. What's the option for field level fighters? Third, the vote bank politics is posing a threat to Hindu unity. What reforms do you suggest? These are the questions he asked.
Yeah, okay. So I think I'll address the last one first regarding the reforms and all that, which I've spoken at some length, that, organizing on the developing what is known as Hindu consciousness, which I think Swami Vivekananda has said much more eruditely than I possibly can even dream of. So revisit Swamiji, people like Ramana Maharshi, because they offer solutions which are eternal. It is not just meeting the need of the hour. They are, everlasting solutions. That is one. And number two, regarding, the secular communal, please get out of the trap. They are mere terminologies. They on the ground, these terms translate into the murder of Hindu sadhus. Do not fall into the trap of, the secular communal whatever. Remember, we are fighting a battle for our own survival. This is not the time to sit and theorize and, do TV debates or, write great articles and just to have an intellectual high. This is not the time for that. There's a famous analogy that I read long back, that as the armies of Islam were knocking the doors of Christianity, so-called Christendom in the medieval era, the scholars inside were busy debating, the finer points of theology, even as a barbarian outside was busy sharpening his sword. This is not the time for these debates. We can have them internally or whatever and feel good about which is more secular or whether equal respect for all religion, equal indifference to all religion. These are all nice and fine in theory, but the time for indulging in theory is long past us. So to answer Mr. Lakshminarayana's question, I will say emphatically that get rid of reservations. They have caused enough and more damage than the British could ever do to Hindu society. Reservation is a privilege. It is not a right. What is the meaning of, Brahmins now? What is the meaning of extending reservations to Brahmins? It is a race to the bottom, sir. It is the race to the gutter. Nothing good will come out of it. Hindu Samaj cutting across all castes. Okay, if you have caste pride, I will encourage it. As long as that caste pride contributes to the survival and the thriving of Hindu civilization. We all worship the same gods. Every caste worships some or other form of Shiva or Vishnu or Devi or Ganapati or Kartik or whoever it is. We all go to the same temples. We all have share the same sacred spaces. It could be Sri Shailam, it could be Tirupati, it could be Kashi, it could be Pandharpur, wherever. So at the divisions are happening at the level of groups. How long will it take before this kind of division invades your own living room? Not long. It's already happening. And if it doesn't invade, that small group of Hindus, Hindu society, will move away to Christianity.
Yeah.
At a constitutional level, make it make it a crime to speak negatively against Hindus.
So one law which is the biggest culprit, one section which is the biggest culprit, which has caused the maximum Christian growth in the country is Article 371. We are all talking about Article 370, but we are conveniently keeping quiet on Article 371. So 371 has converted almost the whole of Northeast into Christianity.
Yeah.
Because we can't even start up a Saraswati Shishu Mandir there or Vivekananda Vidyalaya. Can't do anything. Whereas church started by a local becomes a local religion which you cannot go and touch.
Yeah.
And sad part of it is we have extended the inner line permit to Meghalaya now after the CAA. We have compounded it, we have not escaped it. I think.
No, that's what I'm saying. No, you're just, look, one brick has come apart here. So what you do is, instead of fixing that, the foundation is shaking, but what you're doing is, fixing this brick.
Yeah, true.
Hoping the building will somehow stand. It won't.
Yeah, sure. Prabhas ji, go ahead, please.
So I have time for exactly 2 more questions. So I think if you can make it brief, it will be great.
Namaste ji, this is Prabhas. Thank you very much for your talk. I'm actually an RSS Swayam Sevak. And I have a unique question. As I've heard many other intellectuals like Rajiv Malhotra and G.D. Bakshi talk about the information warfare, how we are going to counter the anti-Hindu content. Like recently, Sunil Ambekar, Sarkarevaha of RSS, he said something about, okay, only Tabligis are bad, not all Muslims are bad. That offended a lot of Hindus on Twitter, and they started attacking me for being a Swayam Sevak. You're saying, no, you are not secular, you're not Hindu to RSS, you're secular, what about bullshit? So how can we build an alternative Hindutva ecosystem to counter the secular ecosystem?
The ecosystem already exists. Yeah, you should tap into your strengths. It already exists. But what bigger organization than RSS and VHP is needed? It already exists. No, you have to tap into it. Know how to, like I said, pick and choose your battles wisely. Always operate at the level of civilizational survival. And all these intellectual riffraff, whatever these fancy terms, and it's not that I don't know of them. The point is they have their place, and this is not that place.
Okay. Venkat PSVM, please go ahead, sir. Hello.
Your voice is echoing. I can't really hear anything.
Yeah. Venkatji, you have to speak into the mic.
No.
I think he seems to have a problem. I think we'll leave it.
Audio problem, I think.
Yeah, we will figure that out later. Next is, I think, Mandeep ji, go ahead, yeah.
Namaskar ji.
Namaste.
Are you able to listen me?
Yeah.
Jay, I want to say one thing. With my little knowledge, I can say that the biggest critics of Hindutva is not from the Christians, fathers, or the Muslim mullahs, but it's from the fellow Hindus itself. And
No, but do you please ask a question? Let's not get into what you know. I mean, we don't have time. He's actually leaving now, so please stick to your question, sir.
Yeah, there are many people, many academicians in the education system who are profounding the leftism or liberal values, and many are getting mainly the millennials now. Many are attracted to that because there is no alternative in that education system to counter that. Like in the vote system, like we say, fence sitters.
No, please don't give it. We are all aware of it. What's your question? Please ask your question.
How to counter the liberal teachings of the professors or academicians who are large in number?
Yeah, great.
Okay.
We all know the ecosystem. Please, we'll stick to that.
I think I've given you the 5 points. You can draw your counters from that. The first thing is, don't take them seriously. You have to brand them as an inferior species. These people are not mentally stable. I have a word for them. They're called incurables. Next time they open their mouth, just say that you're an incurable and make this term popular. Or call them mentally unstable. You need treatment, you need therapy. So be condescending, mock them. Do not get into, their terminological debates, oh, you're secular, you're that, or you're not this, this is India is diverse, and all that. But these words should not come out from their mouth. they're good at taking offense. One, if it doesn't work, they're good at being self-righteous. If even that doesn't work, they will, either play the victim, or there is a fourth strategy. What they will do is that they will use a word of kindness and compassion and harmony. So all these words, they do not practice or follow it themselves. So you have to treat them with the contempt they deserve. You don't have to rebut them. Those days are over. How long will you rebut? Tell me. It's not that they will stop. They won't stop. Nothing will appeal to them because fundamentally they want to destroy you. And all these are steps for a civilizational takeover. Rest is all fluff. That can be countered. A lot of people are there to counter it. But next time you come across this kind of nonsense, say that it is nonsense. Treat them with contempt. Treat them like mental patients.
Thank you. Actually, Prajna Bharati, when we go to the TV debates, we have coined them NIR, non-Indian residents.
Yeah.
Maybe
something like that. You should parody them.
Yeah.
I have time for only one question. I'm sorry.
Ramon ji, please go ahead.
Sir, namaste.
Namaste.
Sir, the constitution for any government in Indian context also should be based on the dharma of that particular country, the culture and the customs prevailing of their country. So India is no exception to it, and constitution can be amended, rewritten at any point of time. This is one thing, sir. Then the laws.
But what is your question, sir?
That is only my question, sir. We need to rewrite our constitution according to Indian Sanatana Dharma. Whether what is the problem for the government to do this?
Right. Thank you.
Right.
Sir, okay. Little more, sir. Then the laws in any country, particularly in India, should be uniformly applicable across the country and to all the people alike. Why we are failing in framing and implementing such laws?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next. Yeah, one last and then we are done.
Yeah. Chetan ji, go ahead. Yeah.
Quickly, please.
Namaste, Sandeep ji.
Namaste.
My question is how to deal with ignorant Hindus, and my second question is how to stop Hindus becoming communist.
Well, I think my entire lecture today was focused on this. So you can watch a recording of this maybe later on YouTube. That will answer it.
Yeah. Maybe one last question you can take, Sandeep ji. Sri Salam ji.
Okay.
Yeah, Sri Salam ji, please go ahead. Yeah.
Really the last one. Yeah.
Sure. Sri Salam ji, go ahead. Yeah.
Sir, first question is, sir, CM KCR is friendly with MIM leaders. The answer would be vote bank. But how to stop it, sir? Second one is how to stop Hindus converting into Christianity.
Well, I think I've answered both of them in a different way. I really don't know how to stop a chief minister from, creating his vote banks. But I think I've answered this tangentially that you create such a powerful vote bank that will make MIM's vote bank irrelevant.
Yeah, sure.
That is the only solution. Make it expensive for those people. So I think with that, I really need to go, although, we could continue this some other time.
Yeah, no, we'll be closing it, sir.
I'm really running out of time.
Yeah, just want to thank you. Thanks a lot, Sandeep ji, for sparing your time and being very forthright in your views. I hope, I do have a lot of requests still going on, but then I think we need to put the gelatin sometime.
Right.
Thank you, and thank you all so much. And it's been a pleasure to have Sandeep ji on our call. And hope to see you again tomorrow evening. Bharat Mata.
Likewise.
Namaste.
Namaste.